welcome back to Holding Space. We are going to continue our conversation with Coral Teal, describing some of the horrific abusive situations she's found herself in and some of her struggles to try and put the situations right. It's not something that can be done easily. It takes a lot of courage. It takes intestinal fortitude beyond most people's imagining to be able to see their way through to handle these situations. And the tremendous stress and abuse that she's suffered has been, well, hard to hear. So this is sort of a trigger warning for people who may have trouble hearing some of these stories, but it is all true. It is all accurate. It is a sort of microcosm of all the abuses that people tend to suffer. And there are so many who don't survive to tell their stories. And she does. So let us continue.
I did have 11 children, 8 are living. I lost 3 babies through miscarriage, but I loved and cherished my children, still do. And I was always threatened, even when I was in this people praise cult, that I would lose my children if I ever sought safety. And I saw other women leave without their children. So that's a psychological threat that no woman, you can't even assimilate it. It's a threat that you wake up with every day. But after my 7th birth, 6 months later, I suffered a severe postpartum depression, partial stroke. I collapsed. I was working 20-hour days for many years, remodeling homes for my husband. He then forced me to homeschool because he didn't want me around people, more isolation, and moved us in the middle of the country, away from people. I wasn't allowed to see family or friends, and I had home births. He didn't want me seeing my doctor. My daughters grew up watching me and reporting to him at night. So my ex-husband really had surrogate wives, his sister Peggy Warner, his mother, and my 2 oldest twin daughters. So everything I did, anybody I talked to, as reported.
Yeah, that
So after the
isolation.
7th child, I did break down, and I was beaten. I was raped at a time I could not barely talk or feed myself or shower or clothe myself. I was living with my brother in Dallasport, Washington, and he would call my brother and tell him to get me dressed. He was going to pick me up and take me to a motel. And he fulfilled his sexual desires and would rape me, and I'd be dropped off at my brother's home. And while my brother was trying to teach me how to shower, how to feed myself. But I was taken to many pastors who exorcised me for demons. I was left in Chicago, Illinois during this period of time without doctor care to be exorcised for demons by their employees. I was called a witch, that I had a Jezebel spirit, that I hadn't learned how to submit to my husband or God's authorities over me. I was forced to clean toilets at the hotel there. I write about all of this in my book, and I did become pregnant twice during that period of time, a 20-month period, and I was left also at a halfway house in Portland, Oregon, in the Killingsworth district, Killingsworth Street, and I was left in a halfway house with ex-cons out of the prison. It was rat and lice infested, and this was by Bill Gothard, the Bill Gothard Institute, and Pastor Bill Hurd from Roseburg, Oregon, and my husband, and I lived there for a while, and I just wanted to die. I needed a doctor, and I was pregnant, and I woke up. Like that film with Diana Ross, Out of the Darkness, I woke up at 5 months along in January 1995, and my doctor saw me, and he called Margie Belay, a journalist. He was upset. He knew I had been ill, and I hadn't been allowed to see him. I would call him every now and then. He was my only safe contact, but I couldn't see him, and a friend secretly brought me to him, and I had my baby. 4 months later, I didn't want my husband in the room while I birthed my child, but I was still married, and my husband didn't want the doctor to save my life. An older son had been violent with me, so I was hemorrhaging before I got to the hospital, and my husband didn't want my life to be saved, and the doctor, it's in the medical notes, had to threaten to remove my husband from the hospital, and he saved both my baby and I was in the hospital 3 days. But I then sought friends out of Washington State to come and help watch my children while I went to see an attorney, and I reported the rapes of my daughters. And then He told me to get a restraining order. He knew I'd been raped. And things went very poorly after that for the next 25 years. I was in court for 23 years, 50 court hearings, being legally stalked and sued, and been in front of 8 judges, even women judges. I believe patriarchy. Even a district attorney, John Haroldson, wrote a 5-star review for my memoir speaking about that patriarchy is often in our courtrooms. And even women judges have been as cruel or more so than the men. But I have a saying about patriarchy that women who carry the water for the patriarchy are often the first to drown. The patriarchy has caused a lot of the harm in my life, but basically from childhood, for many years of rape and beatings and high expectations and caring for my family and financially supporting them, and then court reporter school, pilot school, ground school, was a court reporter for a couple years, and then marriage for 21 years, 11 children, went through 8 cults. My ex-husband was a member of many cults. And then I sought safety. Oh, I would say I planned my escape and went into hiding so I wouldn't be raped or beaten and my daughters could be safe. So I left with my 3 youngest children because the 4 older children had already been brainwashed that I was evil, and I'd been threatened not to do this. So friends, even women who'd been abused in the workplace by my ex-husband, hid my van at night. I was put in motel rooms under different people's names, and the Polk County Sheriff's Office from Dallas, Oregon, was hunting me. I would have been returned if they found me, and finally a judge allowed me to live in hiding before the court hearing. I went through about 6 psychological exams to prove my mental wellness to the court. I was well. Doctors came for me to court, and the judge said he was leaving my younger children with me. And then 10 days later, orders signed by him removing all children from me, even my nursing baby, abruptly. So I had to go to the hospital, get a breast pump, and I've been in court since then and lived in my car for several years. And I'm probably pretty much financially flatlined now. And I've been working sometimes 6 to 7 days a week to pay debt from all of this. And I'm at a point where I'm going to save my health, but I'm financially flatlined. And even in low income apartments, you can't do both. You can't juggle all the financial overhead. So I may end up homeless in the next few months, and I'm okay with that. I understand my life. I understand why it is the way it is. And once you understand even the control mechanisms of patriarchy in our society, you just understand that this is the way it is until someday it is changed.
I wanted to highlight a few things that you were saying. You're right, patriarchy is not just men. It's the dominant philosophy, and it can have men, women, children subscribe to it. Also, the systems that you describe that support and facilitate your abuse. It always amazes me. And I've worked with a number of people who have been victims of abuse, survivors, I should say, of abuse. They were being victimized at the time that I met them. And the things that they have been through, it absolutely boggles the mind. But also, what is even more boggling is the support that the abusers have and the communities that form around them and support this life. I can't even begin to imagine.
We may be repeating that with the Project 2025. It has many of the ideology of the Handmaid's Tale. I've read it, and many of our rights have been taken. I knew that would happen, even with the Supreme Court the way it is. I knew about this years ago, even when I was homeschooling. Many of their goals were to have a theocracy government and to get people who were legalistic Christians trained and either become attorneys and where they could be in high places in our government, which has occurred. And so there's not going to be a good ending if
There's
that is
still a
not.
lot of us who are, opposed to that idea. And, nobody, I think part of the horror that people saw of The Handmaid's Tale is that they said, oh, well, that can't really happen. Oh, yes, it can.
Yes,
Of
it
course
is.
it can. And it is. And, there are systems in place like that already. And there are people who are willing to subscribe to that. It's, again, nothing that's really horrible. It's too much of a work of fiction. It's all doable. The people who enabled your abusers were never brought to justice?
No, none. I could share there's probably about 50 perpetrators in my life, people that threaten me, people who've, well, I'll give another example. Often when trauma survivors do escape, say they live through the escape, many are killed. That's the most dangerous time to be seeking safety. If you survive, yes, horrific things will happen in family court. It's like you're having to stand next to a person who's beaten you, who's threatened you, used coercive control, has raped you, and they're not treated as a criminal. They're just a husband, family court. And then if you report crimes, often you become the criminal. You are the villain. They call that alienation. You're alienating the children from their father, even if you say the truth. So then many of us are gagged. We're not allowed. Even my older children, I did have contact with some, and I would say, well, that's your choice. You need to journey and decide for yourself if you want contact with your father. I wrote a book. Eventually, I had no contact, and I went under an address protection program. Contact with my children meant that I was harmed when I go on the property. His mother, Helen Warner, and him decided if I could see the children or not, or that was my court-ordered day, but he'd want to walk with me, and his attorney also told me I needed to show the children that I was in harmony, that I was showing good faith with the father that had raped and beaten and threatened me and dragged me through 8 cults. So it was very difficult. And one time he wanted the children and him wanted to take a walk in the woods with me. That did not go well. He had the children go back to the home and he attempted to sexually assault me. He believed I was his wife. So there was no protection. I had no monies to continue to go to court. They didn't care anyway. When you report things, even district attorneys supported my ex-husband. I was poor at the time of my divorce. It cost $150,000 the first month. I was put through 45 hours of depositions at a couple hundred an hour. I had no money. I just had to borrow from the divorce, and there was huge bills afterwards. And I worked in a warehouse. Even after my 11th child, I was still very frail because I'd been ill for 2 years before that. But I worked in a warehouse, hard labor job, and worked at nights at a restaurant and worked on my business, my art business, and it wasn't enough. I'm trying to say is there's predators that show up in your life. One of them was a doctor that I had to see after I lost my baby and children. I was in shock. I am still in shock. I was a good nurturing mother. I had a severe postpartum depression without medical care. Doctors wanted to see me, but my ex would go with me to the doctor, but he wouldn't let me speak alone. So I was dismissed. I think Oregon should change laws about that when somebody has the legal right to not allow you medical care. So one doctor said your depression would have lasted 3 months if we could have treated you, but instead you were beaten, taken to halfway houses and cults and exercise for demons. That didn't help my mental health. But I saw Dr. Charles Kuttner after the divorce. I was assigned to see him, and then it was part of me being able to see my children too, just to show that I was proceeding along with work and providing for myself. I was ordered to pay my abuser rapist child support. That came to be twice as much as my income at a hearing I wasn't told about. So that was just paid off just a few years ago. When I was 64 years old, people helped me with a fundraiser so I could pay my rapist the final payment of almost $4,000. And my older 8 children got a dividend from all of that. And they were at court to help support him. One of them had the judge read a vile hate letter to me. It was kind of part of the family project. But this one doctor I saw, first when he met my husband, he thought he was such a wonderful man and wondered what was wrong with me, that I'd be depressed. And then, well, even counseling with him, he told me, why didn't you do something to stop your childhood rape? Like a 6 to 10-year-old, what do you do? I
Exactly.
it was just really put off. And then he He'd use unethical treatment, have me hold an Indian basket that his wife had made and hold an eagle feather over my head that he said had landed in his office, and checking out my auras, private and invasive questions of me while doing that ceremony. And he was the one that required that I come to his office at a PTSD workshop as part of the ending of my therapy. And this George Amiot, a former Marine and a PTSD therapist for the VA, unlicensed therapist for the VA, gave the workshop. And my doctor admitted, even through email, that he had shared a lot with me. This man knew I'd had 8 children, been at cult, lost my babies in court. He knew everything about me, and I was prey to him. And my doctor wanted me to go then to the next seminar that this Mr. Amiot had at the Yakima Nation in Washington State. And I said, no, I don't want to go. And so then I guess this George Amiot asked for my phone number, and Dr. Kuttner gave it to him. And after that, I didn't have family, I didn't have friends. It was just Dr. Kuttner. And then George Amiot, he kind of showed up in my life. He was a documentary film producer and acted. His mask was an advocate. And so I journeyed with him, getting to know him for a few months. And within a couple months, he had used up my credit cards, threatened me, took my IRA at a VA hospital in South Dakota. But before this, I had introduced him to 12 of my friends. Many of them I knew 20 years, and they just thought he was a wonderful person and that I shouldn't be afraid to meet new people. They're not all going to be like my ex-husband. But I had to escape him, and he hunted me down. He knew my car and license plate, and one time he came to my apartment and beat and strangled me to an inch of my life. And I had a restraining order, and then because there was so much financial disarray, I had nothing, and I was headed to homelessness. One legal advocate said I'd have to overturn the restraining order to then be able to deal with court and this summary judgment I had, which I did get. I did have a summary judgment against him, but he never paid. And then the courts filed his case wrong. He didn't submit to the anger management. If people know you, they only get anger management. If he did not do that, he was supposed to go to jail, and the courts filed his case wrong. There was no overturning it. He just never have to pay me and no jail time. He worked at Evergreen State College. He's very popular within the veteran and Native American community. So I just warned Evergreen State College about him recently. I felt it was my duty to say you have a predator in the midst of college kids. I don't really care if he's a friend of the faculty. Your students need protected. So I'm not sure where that's all going, but I do believe if we know of someone, but it's the enablers. I've even confronted recently my son, who runs a baseball business in Oregon, and he is a talent scout for the Kansas City Royals. He supported my husband. He has never wished to contact me. He put on a funeral, an honoring service for my husband, and he has my book. He knows what happened. A lot of my children witnessed this, but they are all supportive of what he did to me. And I've contacted, this includes threatening me not to report crimes of rape. And so I believe when people work with children and they're an influence in their lives, and they are domestic violence and rape apologists, they are not safe for your children. Full stop, period. And I don't care. One person said, if that was my son, or no, if that was someone else, would you report him, to warn? Or at least I've asked the Kansas City Royals, could you ask him to have some counseling in these matters? Because I do not believe he's on the side of victims by his actions. And they've never responded to me. So that's what I do. I do believe it's important to expose enablers. Even the address protection program I'm under right now, the advocate knows about my story that works with the Attorney General. And she called me in November. We talked at length about this, that the enablers are just as dangerous as the perpetrators and criminals. And she said, Coral, if you feel safe and strong enough, expose them all. And I did. I wrote a 45-page document, and I have. And I don't know what difference it will make. It seems all the churches surround all the enablers in my life. The churches ignore me. I've written letters, and I'm basically called mentally ill, crazy, villain. And so that's the reputation you get when you stand up to perpetrators and enablers. I do have a daughter that she works at Baptist Church in Independence, Oregon. Her husband, Ben Bobita, is the executive director of a Christian ministry called the Gate Youth Foundation. They're across the street from the Independence High School. They have full access to the high school, and they are legalistic Christians. They agree what happened to me is right, and they're working with young children. And I believe there's a violation of church and state with the high school, but the school board has voted that this group can have full access. But my daughter sat with my mother while she was ill, fully knowing that my mother sex trafficked me for years. I do not understand people who are very comfortable with perpetrators that were not sorry. My mother, I talked to her before she passed. I was on the phone with her when she passed at the hospital. But I did learn a lot, and I learned that they knew my uncle was also raping another girl, and the family paid a huge amount of money for attorneys, so he won that case. And that was the same time that they were giving me to him. My children are okay with this. My daughter helps her husband run this ministry and other Christian ministries, and they are okay with helping perpetrators, enabling them, supporting them to further harm me. I think there's something very morally wrong with that.
And I think a lot of people would say, well, maybe they didn't know or maybe they didn't believe, but there's plenty of evidence that people do believe and still continue to support heinous situations.
Yes, that's true. I've been erased.
Having your voice heard, I think by having your voice heard, you're able to give some perspective and, again, some awareness. I think a lot of this is hard for people to hear, but it's nonetheless the truth. It's your experience, and it is, like I said, you're not the only one. I've heard other stories that are similar, and I know that as strange and as bizarre and as horrible as it seems, this is not a movie of the week.
True.
This is reality for a lot of people. And the fact that it goes on behind closed doors, and the fact that the system is able to airbrush it so that it seems like it's okay is not okay. I know you were telling the story about the horse that was hobbled until and it kept running at full speed until it broke its legs. You are running at full speed, and I hope it's something that's going to be, if I can contribute in some small way to making a difference, to letting the voices be heard, then I think that's really important to do. There are some people in law enforcement, there are some people who are actually working on the side of survivors. We're trying to make a difference. Psychologists, police, some lawmakers, just not enough. We need more. And, by sharing that voice, we can hopefully get more people gathered around us, build our community of support.
Pardon me?
And go, yes, please go ahead.
Yes, for mothers who've lost their children through family court, sadly, it's such a psychic shock that many of them unalive themselves. It is very hard to function. And yet there is a battered mothers custody conference in Albany, Oregon, every Mother's Day time frame. And Dr. Maureen Hanna, Hannah, has chaired this conference for a couple decades, and it's helped many women meet other survivors of that. But I have found in my decades of seeking safety, there's really not much help. Even the safe home in Dallas, Oregon, did with my ex-husband and his abusive pastors, there's just not been any help that showed up. I've met helpers, though. There's people that showed up. Dr. Barbara May, she was professor of nursing at Linfield College, just was a gift. And I've known her many years now, and she was a gift in my life. And there's been other people gone through extreme trauma that have shown up in my life and been supportive. But the hardest part is a lot of people telling you to move on or don't dwell in the past. Just move on, forget it. You really don't forget it. You do learn to carry it, but those are some fierce words that do not help trauma survivors. And basically your whole life is your you're having to compartmentalize. You'll have to take down one compartment and work with it, confront. But even when you confront, you lose people. You will lose your family. It's not been friendly. And I have written my cousin, Beverly Murky, who has received many inheritance in her life. She's in Goodyear, Arizona now, and I've dedicated a book to her. It was an open letter to her, but I never hear any response. I even recently wrote her that I don't have monies for a burial or a cremation. Could she please even give some of my family's inheritance to me? It may be near $1 million for a burial and cremation, and there's no response. So yeah, the cruelty is that's profound. I'm just having to live in our society and
Yes.
make decisions, even under our systems. Like the judge wanted me to choose between my baby, youngest 3, maybe youngest 4. And I said, no, I don't choose. I don't choose any of them. I love each of them the same. And if I would choose one, it would just destroy the psyche of the others. So to not choose any, like Sophie's Choice movie. I also want to mention another movie that has been helpful, I think, to many survivors. I was interviewing with a documentary film producer last year from HBO and Netflix, and we both agreed that the Netflix series called American Nightmare is one of the best for survivors. It follows a woman's life that was kidnapped and raped, and the police and the FBI called her the Gone Girl on national TV. And it covers her story. It has a better ending for her at the end, but nobody was ever removed from their jobs for doing that to her. But that's how a lot of victims are treated.
I think that's good. And I think, being able to bring these voices to the popular culture in different ways, it raises awareness. It raises the ire of people who would want to stand up to this. And I think we should all continue to stand up. Thank you for being here today. I really appreciate your time. And it's so moving to hear the things that you've been through. And again, for the people who say, that's too much, that can't really be real. Oh, yes, it is. Yes, it is. I mean, from a different perspective, I can tell you I've heard any 1 or 5 of these stories from other people also. And it's just absolutely stunning, but it is a story worth telling, and it is a story worth fighting for. And I'm glad you're fighting.
I
I hope
do.
you never stop.
I will continue to stand up for myself and others. And I do have the receipts. I have 23 years of court videotapes, audio tapes, transcripts, affidavits. And the sad part is when you put a book out, other victims come to you and said, I was abused by Pastor Bill Hurd also. I was abused by your husband in the workplace, every workplace. And these women come forward. They filed affidavits in my court case. And so when you speak up, other people find you and they're thankful that you expose their perpetrators too. But yes, I will continue to give voice to the violence and for those who haven't found their voice and for those who aren't here anymore.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much for all your work and for just surviving. Thank you for surviving sounds lame, but it's truly a miracle sometimes. And just surviving is something. It is a start. And it's the beginning of how we are able to make these things work.
I want to share too, I have no contact with my children. I did when they were young for just a short time, and then it became too violent to be in their life. And they were being harmed because they loved me and wanted to be with me or wanted to run away. So since they were young, it's been a 20 some years now, and they were taught to hate me. And James Baldwin writes a lot about that. And there's wisdom out there about hate, what it is. But I continue to pray for their highest good and everyone's highest good.
Thank you. Well, thank you everyone for holding space for me and for Coral today. And it's a moving story, and I think all of us can do something. And just by being aware, it's a good start.
Thank you.
I'll see you next time.